Hello and welcome to another edition of D&D Stories. I am your host Rob from the channel Performance Check, and this is the show where we sit around and I regale you about the time when something cool happened within the hit role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons. So, last time I was telling you the beginning of the story known as Devil's Line, in which our hero, Theodrex of Hemlon the Ranger, met with my character, Valdane, the Sorcerer, in this brand new campaign DM'd by my good friend Mike, who had previously played Droskell Hammerstone of the Undercroft. When we had last left our heroes, word had reached Theodrex that Hemlon, his homeland, has been under siege. It is under threat from a horde of terrifying fanatical reavers that are murdering hunting parties of rangers and generally causing trouble and strife across this particular part of Main Realm. So Theodrex, bound by his links to his homeland despite being exiled, decided to go and investigate under the bidding of Valdane, who had saved Theodrex's life in an alleyway a few evenings before. They had joined the Rangers of Hemlon as they did battle against these reavers, and now before them, manifesting from fire and darkness, a tiefling had appeared with oily silver skin and heavy armour and a long flowing cloak, a blazing onyx sword coated with fire in his hand. And when we had last left them, this tiefling had declared that the Devil's Line was once again going to reach a point of supremacy at the cost of the lives of all of this realm. The tiefling begins to advance, swinging his flaming blade against Valdane, who has risen a hand to defend himself against the infernal power. I raise my hand as we're sat around the gaming table and I say, just so you know, my armor class is now at a +4. And Mike looks over the DM screen at me and says, okay, why? Mage armor, I say with a smile. Magic was something that we hadn't really explored an awful lot of in the first campaign that I'd run for Matt and Mike, so Mike, as a relatively new DM, found it surprising when Valdane had all these magical sort of solutions to the problems he was putting against us. So as this tiefling brings this flaming sword reeling down upon the sorcerer, Valdane, this, what I like to imagine to be looks like hard light almost, sort of surrounds Valdane in sort of like armor form. And the sorcerer is able to deflect the blow with his mage armor and back away from this tiefling. Theodrex is rushing to the flank, drawing the tiefling's attention now by firing shot after shot after shot at this horned threat. The tiefling is staggered as but 1 and 2 arrows strike into the gaps between his armor, and with a snarl he gives a horrifying look at the ranger and whoom, disappears in a jet of fire and appears right beside the ranger in a burst of heat, and he reaches out with a taloned hand and seizes Theodrex, lifts him into the air and hurls him against a tree, aims his palm at the ranger and fires a fireball at the ranger as he strikes the tree. The explosion rocks the valley in which our heroes, the ranger and this tiefling, are battling in. It is thankful that Theodrex's primary stat is dexterity. That is the only thing that saves him from this fireball. He is able to make the save but still receives half damage. He is hit full in the chest by this fireball, but is able to roll with the impact, I guess, so it doesn't hurt him as much. I'm not entirely sure how you can justify surviving an explosion of such magnitude, but he does. However, Theodrex isn't looking great at all. He is just flung across one side of the valley and just hits into the side of a tree. His bow falls from his grasp, And he just draws a blade ready to just engage this tiefling one-on-one up close. And as the tiefling is stalking towards him, raising his blade, we see Valdane across the other side of the valley just go firing forth 2 scorching rays. The scorching blasts find their mark. They strike the tiefling, who turns around with an evil smile. It is apparent now that this particular individual is resistant or perhaps even immune to the power of fire, and glaring at the sorcerer, he says, "I shall show you the meaning of the flame," and clenching his fist, opening it, shows this roiling ball of fire and sends it rolling towards the sorcerer. TheWriter basically rises up behind this tiefling and basically starts just jabbing his knife into the creature's back once, twice. The tiefling whirls about, that flaming blade in his hand, takes like a golf swing at TheWriter's head, who is able to duck beneath it. Valdane yells, "TheWriter, get out of the way!" because they are lined up. And you will see exactly what the problem would be if TheWriter didn't get out of the way. TheWriter hurls himself to the left as Valdane calls forth from the sky a bolt of lightning that passes through his body and blasts horizontally across the valley towards the tiefling. The tiefling brings his blade up in an attempt to deflect the lightning bolt, but is unable to, and is struck with the full power of Valdane's most potent spell at the time, or one of the most potent spells at the time, racked by electricity this time, something the tiefling is not immune to. He gives a shuddering gasp, the metal armor upon him aiding Valdane's purpose, aiding the sorcerer, bringing this tiefling to his knees. And then we stop, because me and Matt have an idea, and we look to each other and then look to Mike and say, hang on a second. It's all very well that we're having this dramatic fight. We hate to put a pause on it, but the Rangers, are they still busy? And Mike says, well, they're just finishing off a few stragglers. And then I look to Matt, and then Matt, as TheWriter says, "Rangers of Hemlon, form up!" The Rangers basically form like a firing squad line, each of them drawing an arrow, knocking it, and loosing a wall of arrows just hits this tiefling in the chest, and he just staggers back. TheWriter draws his sword now and brings it down hard upon the tiefling, who is able to just deflect the blow slightly, but is still injured by the slice of the attack. And then Valdane just walks up behind the tiefling, puts his palm on the back of the tiefling's head, and just activates Shocking Grasp. The tiefling is just frozen for a moment, horror in his devil-like eyes. And then he just slumps forward. Dead. Mike, the DM, looks at us in shock. "You killed him," he said. "Yeah." We both retort, "Yeah, we did." And Mike looks stunned. And we realise, without Mike saying a word, that we've actually just killed one of his primary villains in the first meeting of that villain. Mike was a relatively new DM. I don't think he foresaw us using the Rangers of Hemlon to, like, with that massive output of damage with all of their arrows hitting him. Like, there were about 10 arrows that struck that guy before the final round of combat, where TheWriter got his last attack with the blade, and then Valdane finished him with the Shocking Grasp. So Mike was a little bit stunned. However, unperturbed by this, to give him his credit, he was like, well, okay, so, the creature, this tiefling, lies before you. He is slain, and you are able to loot his body, and you find that there are a number of strange potions that you're not really sure what they are, but they don't look particularly nice, but with perhaps a bit of effort, you might be able to work out what they are. And Valdane, being keen with the skill of alchemy, decides to pocket those. They strip the armor, but it's relatively useless for their purpose. It would be useless for the sorcerer, it would be useless for the ranger. So they decide just to leave it with the Rangers of Hemlon, who, it seems, are sort of surrounding them at this point, because while they have appreciated this aid that has arrived in the form of Valdane and Theodrex, they are a little bit surprised that that ranger is Theodrex. One or two of those individuals recognize him instantly, and Theodrex becomes instantly uneasy, and he says, "Friends, I have returned. I know that I have been exiled from these lands, but at the word of hearing that my home was under attack, I had to come and help. I had to come and find out what was going on." And this older, grizzled-looking ranger steps forth and he says, "Theodrex, it has been some time. I thought you understood that if you were to ever return to these lands, you would be executed for your crimes." And Theodrex just looks to the ground, and he doesn't say a word. Valdane looks from Theodrex to this old ranger, and he says, "I don't believe we've been introduced. My name is Valdane. And you are?" "Aldrin," the older ranger says, "and your friend is forbidden from treading these lands." Valdane sort of thinks for a second. "Correct me if I'm wrong, but if it wasn't for our friend here and I intervening, the battle might very well have gone a different way. You should show gratitude, Ranger, for had we not been here, the day might have gone ill." And the older ranger looks to his men who are battered, bruised, injured. Some of them lie dead, killed by the Reavers. And he gives sort of like a grim nod. "It is true, your coming was fortuitous, it has to be said. But we cannot allow Theodrex to linger here. We should, by all rights, and by the rights of our people, lead him to trial, and then to execution for returning here." Valdane says, "What exactly did he do to deserve this? I haven't known this individual long, but from what I hear, he is the saviour of Orenthale, and he is now the saviour of you, so come on, give him a bit of slack." And Aldrin says, glaring at Theodrex all the while, "Theodrex was found resting and asleep, his blade wet with the blood of an entire ranging party. All of those that went out on that expedition with him died. He was found resting and content." Valdane stares at Theodrex, who is still just staring at the ground, just not making eye contact, not wanting this to really be happening. Eventually Theodrex speaks and he says, "It is true, it is all true. When I awoke, my hands and my weapons were covered in blood. All of my arrows were spent. They were buried within the hearts of my friends. And I had not stirred. I had not seen. I had not witnessed what had happened. But I have dreams, Valdane. I have dreams of killing them." And Aldrin sort of looks over at Theodrex with sort of like a triumphant smirk, as if to say, "We all know you did it." Valdane sort of like looks from Theodrex to Aldrin and then says, "Well, that isn't proof. That is not categorical proof that Theodrex caused those deaths." And although Valdane is saying this and is very charismatic, there is a little bit of doubt in his voice. And Aldrin says, "It is true, we did not have enough evidence to rightly execute this ranger here, but evidence enough to ensure that he could be exiled and never trouble our kind again. Theodrex is best forgotten." Valdane bites his tongue. "We will not trouble you further, but I think you can agree that after Theodrex and I helping you today, you will be more than happy, I'm sure, to allow him to wander from the limits of these lands." This grizzled ranger just snarls and says, "There is work to be done. If Theodrex wishes to be penitent for his crimes, he will offer his service to us. Service, says Theodrex. Haven't I done enough? Perhaps, says the old ranger. But as this creature, and he looks at the dead tiefling alluded to, and from some of the answers of the Reavers we have interrogated, it would seem that some shadowy cult is attempting to exterminate all lines of Hemlon and of Ireland to the south. Lines, says Theodrex. And Valdane says, family lines, I'm guessing. All family lines carry blood, and within blood there is a power. I am testament to that. And Theodrex says, what do you mean? And Valdane says, well, I'm a sorcerer. My power is derived from my being, my soul. I have power within my veins. And Theodrex says, I thought you were just a less effective wizard. And Valdane just... A less effective wizard? Did you just say that? Aldrin says, if you wouldn't mind putting aside this discussion, I would bid you to travel south into the land of Ireland. You are to travel from the west of the Worm's Teeth and find Austelle, the city in which King Magnus reigns within. He must be alerted to what is happening across his lands. We Rangers of Hemlon are sworn to protect the north of this place, but we have no support from the likes of Magnus and his forces at Austelle, his keep. I would ask of you to deliver this news that there is a threat on all of those who bear the blood of the old families of this land. And Valdane says, if we agree to do this, if we agree to take this word south, you must promise that one day you will speak for Theodrex. And perhaps we can resolve this matter in a fair and just way, rather than just blaming the first individual you come across with a wet blade. And Aldrin just looks to the ground and says, these are dark times. And I suppose in dark times we must rely on dark messengers. And he shoots a threatening look over at Theodrex. Very well. Head south, take word to King Magnus, and plead with him to act as a king should, and defend his people, and show allegiance to those that have sworn to him. And so, Valdane and Theodrex have a new mission. South to Austelle, the capital of Ireland. The further south they go, the colder it gets. Soon the wet grass is replaced by tundra covered with snow and ice. Cold winds whip around them, blowing Theodrex's cloak and Valdane's coat up in the high breeze. Squinting against the weather battering down upon them, Theodrex turns to Valdane and says, I'm still somewhat uneasy about this working relationship. Valdane says, what do you mean? I understand that your abilities make you effective in combat and in difficult situations. Oh, so I'm effective in those situations, but I'm also a less effective wizard, says Valdane, remembering the biting remark of Theodrex the other day. I'm sorry about that, says Theodrex. I don't mean to be so dismissive. I have to understand that there's a lot about magic that I don't understand. And Theodrex sort of like bows his head to the wind and presses on, and Valdane sort of frowns. Okay, that's strange. You've come around to that idea quite quickly. You seem to be very hesitant about magic before. And then Theodrex says, if you've seen the magic that I've seen, you would be too. Necromancy, I think it was, says Valdane, sort of to Theodrex as he's like walking away. And Theodrex says, yeah. Valdane nods. I know some spells that allude to that particular school of magic. Nasty stuff. But I'm afraid to say that sometimes it can be effective. And TheWriter stops in the snow and looks back and says, doesn't matter how effective some things are. That's wrong. That's against nature. Valdane sort of shakes his head and says, nature? Nature is just one state of existence. Magic spreads across all planes of existence. What is nature? What is nature if we're in a different dimension? What is nature if you're on the fifth circle of hell? Nature is relative, TheWriter. Magic is constant. TheWriter doesn't like the idea of that, and he doesn't like where this conversation is going, so he sort of shrugs and continues on his journey. Where did you learn about your gifts, Valdane? Like I said, it's just part of me. It's always been part of me ever since I was young. Were your parents worried by this? Valdane doesn't answer. Where do you come from, Valdane? I don't really know anything about you. No. No, I tend to keep that sort of information to myself. After all, is this not a working relationship, TheWriter? Do you really need to know that information about me? I just don't. Don't trust me, says Valdane. Oh, I understand. I understand you don't trust me. If you must know, I came upon this place, this land, or at least the land where I met you, after escaping from a place that I would not leave my worst enemy in. Well, actually, that's not strictly true, he says with a mysterious smile. Escaped? Escape where? There are some people in Main Realm that share your opinion of magic, TheWriter. There are some people that fear what they do not understand, and rather than trying to understand it, they think it's best to lock them up. You're in prison, said TheWriter. Not exactly. An asylum. The Arcane Asylum. And Mike asks TheWriter to make a roll. He doesn't get it though, and he says, I've never heard of that place. And Valdane says, like I say, there are some individuals that rather than being understood get placed into the asylum. Some of them deserve it. I don't think I did. Asylum would suggest insanity, says TheWriter, frowning back at Valdane. Yes, says Valdane. I suppose it does. And he gives another strange smile. Speaking of insanity, as Valdane and TheWriter are walking through this wilderness, they come to this kind of gully which divides the land, and they see that if they travel through this particular route, they will be protected somewhat by the landscape from the elements. They will have the wind off them or whatever. They will essentially be able to travel unhindered by the foul winds that whip around this tundra. I don't often go into the random encounters whilst telling these stories. Often it's kind of a given that during these sweeping stories there are fights and encounters that the players come across that, aren't pertinent to the main thrust of the story of the entire campaign. However, I feel compelled to tell you, dear viewers, about this particular random encounter because random is the optimum word. Exploding from a cave within the side of this gully, there stands a 40-foot tall Tyrannosaurus Rex. It is covered in icicles and has a frosty blue gaze. Its huge form whirls about to behold Valdane and TheWriter standing there, and with a roar, it charges. Mike says, roll initiative. And me and Matt are sort of just sat there. Dinosaurs. Now, we've all looked in the monster manual, and there are indeed stats there for dinosaurs of all different kinds. And of course, there is the most famous, the T-Rex. Now, as I've mentioned before, Main Realm is our shared setting, and as such, we add new elements into it per game. What we hadn't expected was there to be dinosaurs. You know, this is a typical fantasy world, and dinosaurs don't generally, factor into, your typical fantasy, at least. I'm sure we can all agree. And yet, we behold this T-Rex that is charging towards us, and TheWriter can't help but say, don't move. You can't see us if we don't move. The T-Rex is still charging at our characters down this gully, and we're still just standing still. I don't think that's going to work, says Valdane, as the T-Rex gets faster and faster and closer. A terrifying battle erupts. TheWriter basically pulls his bow and basically starts loosing shots at this T-Rex, arrows burying themselves into this creature's hide, but it's not slowing down at all. Valdane sends forth scorching rays, striking the creature, and it gives a terrifying roar of pain and fury as it pushes on against us. Valdane basically tries to scale one side of the gully to get a bit of high ground on this creature, whilst TheWriter continues down the gully, rather moving his full character movement back rather than up to the sides. So the T-Rex passes Valdane and continues its pursuit of TheWriter. Now, I had mentioned in a previous story that Matt and Mike, Matt who plays TheWriter, Mike who's DMing currently, have this sort of rivalry that goes on and will often rear its ugly head throughout many of the stories that I will tell here. This particular occasion, Matt felt that Mike was using this T-Rex as basically using the T-Rex to gun at TheWriter to really go for him. And the reason that this was enforced was because the T-Rex was able to catch up with TheWriter relatively quickly and was able to seize TheWriter in its jaws like that, and then lifts him up into the air, catches him fully in his mouth, and swallows the ranger whole. Out of nowhere, a T-Rex just appears and eats TheWriter alive. Valdane is staring in horror as this vast, titanic reptile gives a roar after swallowing TheWriter with seeming contentment. At this point, Valdane has reached the upper point of this gully, and he is just out of reach of this T-Rex that looms back around and begins snapping at the sorcerer who's at the top of this gully. The T-Rex is another vile roar, and Valdane just looks into the creature's mouth in the hopes of seeing TheWriter, but no, swallowed whole. TheWriter is gone. TheWriter is seemingly dead, and Valdane has no choice but to stand upon this rock and basically use every spell at his disposal. Magic missiles. He calls forth lightning, bringing down a lightning bolt upon the creature. He summons more scorching rays. He fields a flaming sphere and sends it rolling down the gully into the T-Rex. The T-Rex all this time is slamming its weight upon the side of this gully. Eventually the rocks are beginning to come loose. Valdane is having to use every bit of dexterity at his disposal to stop him from tumbling down into the gully and becoming T-Rex food. He uses Mage Hand, lifting a number of knives upon his person into the air telekinetically and sending them flying down like darts upon the T-Rex. Is it enough to make the T-Rex back away, giving Valdane one final chance to get a spell off onto this creature? Meanwhile, within the gullet and intestines of this T-Rex, TheWriter is alive and whole, but slowly suffocating and slowly taking bludgeoning damage as he is being drawn into the creature's being. It is horrendous as TheWriter is claustrophobic, he is being crushed basically by this creature's internal workings. He is able to pull a dirk from his shoulder, essentially, and begins, like, desperately trying to stab into this creature. This creature now giving this horrendous howl of pain, but it isn't enough. TheWriter is slowly waning, and the damage is enough to knock him below 0. TheWriter is now unconscious and is now on borrowed time. It is thankful that Valdane is now ready with his final spell. He lifts his hand above him, and within his palm you see a swirling ball of fiery energy, which he casts down upon the T-Rex as it roars, giving a lunging leap at the sorcerer. The fireball hits the back of the creature's mouth, and boom, from its throat explodes this fireball. This creature staggers, hits the side of the gully, and slides to the ground, dead. Valdane works quickly. He jumps basically down the gully and sort of like rolls down the steep incline to get to where the T-Rex has fallen, taking one of the blades that had basically ineffectively sank into the dinosaur when he used Mage Hand. He basically uses it and he starts hacking away at the creature, desperately trying to cut the creature open as TheWriter's life force begins to dwindle to a weaker and weaker point. Eventually, Valdane is able to drag TheWriter from the carcass of this dinosaur and is able to crack a health potion and pour it into his gullet. TheWriter awakens after some time, and Valdane is just stood there above him, staring down upon him, and he says, "That's 2 you owe me, Ranger." "What in the 9 hells was that?" says TheWriter as he finally, like, pulls himself together after the ordeal. And Valdane's looking down upon the corpse of the dinosaur, and he says, "I've never seen such a creature, but such mysterious animals are to be examined closely. Perhaps we can get some rare ingredients from it." And TheWriter gives a little bit of a nod. He can't help but agree with Valdane in this particular area as a survivalist and a tracker and someone who would, you know, get as many ingredients out of animals that you'd hunt as possible. He actually agrees with Valdane, so they begin, like, taking the things that they can. They essentially take, like, the dinosaur's claws, they take some of its teeth, and then Valdane has an idea and he says, "Enough. Leave it as it lies. The snow in this area will preserve it." And TheWriter says, "What's it to you? We've got what we need." And Valdane says, "You can never be certain of when you might need backup." And what he does is that he reaches out with a hand and he places it upon the dinosaur's head, and upon it he casts Arcane Mark, a glowing symbol of basically a V for Valdane appears on the dinosaur's head. "This will make it easier to find," says Valdane, "should we need such an ally in the future." "An ally?" says TheWriter, but Valdane speaks no more. They camp for that night. They basically rest in the cave that the dinosaur had dwelt in amongst the bones of the prey that it had taken and dragged back to its habitat. And TheWriter is livid, because Matt is livid. Matt is absolutely livid. Technically a death. As I've alluded to before, TheWriter throughout our games in Main Realm died many times. This was almost like a get out of jail free card for him in a sense. Like, he was basically on the cusp of death, thanks to Valdane cutting open the dinosaur and getting him a health potion in roughly the amount of time it was required. Like, it was basically around the table we were kind of like, okay, everyone gets one in that case. Everyone gets like a get out of jail free card. Not forgetting, of course, TheWriter's last horrendous demise at the hands, or rather the weight of Droskor plummeting from the keep up onto him, as you might remember if you've seen that story. But anyway, TheWriter isn't particularly happy because Matt isn't particularly happy. But you know, it's all in good fun in the end, and we decide that it's best to press on. Their journey takes them further south and south, and eventually they see upon a vast, sweeping plain, still covered in snow, they see in the distance what must only be Austelle, a castle city, essentially. This is unlike Valdenor, the shining city of the west, that is in Orenthal. Austelle is much more run down, battered by the elements, and it is rather grim looking in general. The architecture suggests that this place was once grand and sweeping and beautiful, like Valdenor, but now it's fallen into a little bit of disrepair. And as they approach, the first thing they notice is that there are a large number of guards monitoring a huge line of people moving into the city. Valdane and TheWriter sort of stare at it, and they think, you know, even when we're playing D&D and in fantasy role-playing and stuff, we still have to contend with queues. There's no escaping it. But regardless, they join this queue and they wait. And they wait and they wait. And it seems that the guards are giving thorough checks to all who enter the city. Valdane leans over to one of the people trying to get into the city. He looks to be a fairly rich merchant. And he leans over and he says, "What brings you to this city? The surrounding wilderness and tundra doesn't really make it out to be some kind of great place for trade. I mean, I see the river," Valdane points, "there's a river further to the south of the city. But what benefits people to come here?" And the merchant says, "Well, haven't you heard? The royal wedding. It begins tomorrow. The ceremonies, the celebrations begins tomorrow. It's going to be a joyous occasion. It is going to bring splendor and wonder back to Ireland. Many in this place have suffered long. Finally, with an alliance with Fereld, the kingdom east of here, we will all have better lives. And that is why we're here to celebrate." Valdane sort of gives a nod. "Sorry, royal wedding. Who exactly? Which member of the royal family?" "Oh, that'll be the prince. Yes, Prince Eustan. He is the first son of King Magnus. And Prince Eustan is to wed Maya Windermere of Fereld, a princess of that great nation. With that alliance, prosperity will return to this place. I'm sure of it." "I see," says Valdane, and he sort of like smiles at TheWriter. "Tell me, I don't suppose..." And then finally they get to the front of the queue and the guards put halberds in front of them and say, "Halt! What is your business here?" The merchant shows some papers and is allowed through, and then Valdane and TheWriter are next. "What is your business here?" they ask of Valdane and TheWriter, and Valdane says, "My good sirs, thank the gods above, you are here. I have the most desperate news for the king." And the guards look to each other and laugh. "Oh, the king, indeed. Do you have a meeting with Pelor afterwards, do you as well?" Valdane says, "No, not quite. But I do have urgent news pertaining to the kingdoms that your good king has allegiance to. You will allow me to pass, me and my friend here. You would not want to be known as the individual that prevented these vital talks from beginning sooner." The guard is taken a little bit aback. When I describe how Valdane is talking, generally speaking, you'll have to sort of imagine that a lot of the time I'm rolling charisma rolls, and Valdane's charisma is through the roof. That is his main stat. And they seem uncertain about this. "Well, without any official documentation, we've been told that we can't let anyone through whatsoever." And Valdane just steps up closer to the guard as he slowly whispers and uses the somatic components at his side. He says,
"You are to escort us beyond these gates. I come here with a very important message for the king, and you will not detain us.
The guard fails his saving throw, and with a nod marches through the gates. The other guards look surprised, but Valdane and TheWriter have already passed through, and they have more people to attend to without following them also. So Valdane is able to sneak them into the city, or rather command them into the city with the spell Dominate, and they're able to get inside. The merchant is still there waiting for them, and he says, "If you would like to take a look at my wares, I'd be more than happy to give you a fair look first. I have many things that you might like to peruse." And Valdane says, "Actually, I would be pleased if we could have some information about this place." And the merchant says, "What would you want to know?" "We need an audience with the king," says TheWriter, sort of like barging past, like sort of just kind of wanting to get to the point. "We need an audience with the king. How do we speak with the king?" "Well, from all accounts, all royal business will be usually put on hold. There will be no meetings of the courts for at least a week after the wedding has taken place." "A week," says Valdane, and he looks at TheWriter, and TheWriter says, "That's too long. We need to talk to them now." "I can't help you," says the merchant. "I am only a humble merchant, but I provide you this information with hopefully good faith. Is there anything you'd like to buy?" "No, thank you," says Valdane, and he walks past. TheWriter gives a nod. The merchant looks annoyed.
"Wait!"
says Valdane, and he stops, and he whirls about, and he looks at the merchant as his wagon is now being brought in through the gates. "Do you have any fine items of clothing, perhaps?" And the merchant gives a nod and says, "Why, yes, only the best." And Valdane looks at TheWriter and smiles and says, "TheWriter, we're going to a wedding." And that is where we're going to leave our heroes for this edition of D&D Stories. Will Valdane and TheWriter get that pertinent message to the king in time? You'll just have to find out next time. If you like this video, give it a like. If you would like to see more like it, then give this channel a subscribe. And of course, one thing we must always remember to do: keep gaming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out the D&D Stories Facebook, Patreon, and t-shirts on Redbubble. Keep gaming!